A few moments of your time this morning. So as Miranda said, my name is Chimu Titi, and I am the Sustainable Living Coordinator. So human beings, like other organisms, are influenced by the selective action of the urban environment. And I say this just to outline where sustainable living fits into health promotion. Oh, I forgot to tell Miranda, slide, please. So social structure, interactions, physiology, health, morphology, and all of these are basically impact the health outcomes of urban dwellers. And so that's important to start this conversation by noting. So other risk factors include altered microbial exposure, a disconnect from environmental microbes, microbiome, vitamin D deficiency, noise and light pollution, and an unequally impoverished population. So these unequally distributed conditions within the built environment create many risk factors which affect human health and well-being. And so that's just the framing that we will start with. Slide. So as part of the social action work of the health promotion team, sustainable living focuses on, of course, enabling people to increase control over and to improve their health through community participation, partnership, empowerment, and equity. And of course, in terms of in practice, that's collaborating with residents and community groups to increase garden and food access, among other things. The next one is to improve health literacy in and around the physical environment. And in practice, that would be things like developing a wide range of skills and competencies that people need in order to make informed choices, reduce health risks, improve quality of life, and of course, protect the environment. And then there's cultivating sustainable individual and community involvement. And this includes supporting or initiating campaigns such as the End Food Waste. Slide. So our case study today will be the Dentonia Park Golf Course. Beginning in June of 2021, the city conducted an operational review of 5 city-operated golf course locations to better understand how to maximize golf and non-golf experience. So about Dentonia specifically, let's start maybe with an overview of golf courses in general. So the city does operate 5 across the city with a mixed operating model. It's maintained by Parks, Forestry, and Recreation. There are private operators who manage ticket sales, golf cart rentals, and pro shops, as well as food and beverage operations. Dentonia Park itself is subsidized by taxpayers, and members are required to pay a fee to access. So on your right-hand side, you can see the demographic of specifically the Dentonia Park Golf Course. This comes from the City of Toronto stats from the consultations that were done in June of 2021. So just not to go through it too much, but so Dentonia Park, for those who are not familiar, or the Dentonia Park Golf Course, I should say, sits between Taylor Massey and the Oakridge neighborhoods. So AKM has done a number of presentations with us, running down the demographics of the areas that we serve. And so you can look at this one in comparison to the demographics of those 2 areas. And so at the top, you have the ethnic or racial breakdown, and at the bottom, you have the yearly income. Okay. So slide, please. So let's talk a bit more about golf courses. And before we do, I'll just say that functioning urban ecosystems are really important, of course, in helping to clear the air and water, cooling urban heat islands, and supporting our well-being by shielding us from hazards and providing opportunities for both rest and play. And of course, they very importantly host a surprising amount of biodiversity. So then what about golf courses themselves? So large amounts of land clearing is required to actually have a golf course, which often results in biotic cleansing. And in addition to harming native habitats, large amounts of water and pesticides are required for the grass to stay green and to keep pests away. And then based on the last slide that we looked at, the demographic of the surrounding neighborhoods are in the minority of the course users, and this specifically highlights in Dentonia Park. Slide, please. So based on what we just discussed in terms of the demographics and environmental impacts during the consultation period, here are the Access Line Sustainable Living recommendations. So the first one was existing golf courses should take every step they possibly can to lower their impact and naturalize areas of the golf course. Next, it would be to involve Indigenous community in land use as well as practice decisions, prioritize environmental and human health, include a food forest, and based on the the feedback from our community specifically is to allow for an area for food growing. Slide, please. So in terms of who we engaged to participate in these consultations, community members were engaged. So specifically, we had people who were on the waiting list for the community garden that Access Alliance currently works with, the Prairie Drive Park 2 garden. We have a waiting list of over 40 people currently. And so those people obviously are quite motivated to have access to land. We also engaged current Prairie Drive Park 2 gardeners, rooftop garden volunteers, as well as members of the wider Access Alliance community. The partners that we worked with were the Toronto Environmental Alliance, Toronto Urban Growers, the Black Environmental Initiative, the South Asian Women's Rights Organization, as well as Dashmawan Bemadzin, which is a First Nations food and food security initiative that serves homeless, underhoused, and Indigenous seniors in the Toronto area. Next slide, please. So Toronto's Infrastructure and Environment Committee passed over staff recommendation to cut the course to just 9 holes and explore other uses for the site. The city council directives that you can see on the right-hand side there were to prioritize opportunities for tree planting and natural area restoration with a focus on native species as part of the capital works on the city-owned golf courses, and reduce pesticides in the maintenance of the city-owned golf courses to the extent possible. Next was to enhance support of off-season public access to and expand complementary in-season programming aligned with Indigenous communities and local communities' priorities on the city-owned golf course. Integrate the city's climate and sustainability, equity, and social partnerships objectives in collaboration with the vendor, partners, and not-for-profit organizations focused on urban agriculture, and to advance Indigenous placemaking opportunities at the city-owned golf courses as part of future capital, wayfinding, and enhancement projects in collaboration with the Indigenous Affairs and Aboriginal Affairs Office. So, these all seem like very great recommendations or directives that the City Council, put to the General Manager of Parks, Forestry, and Recreation. However, there were no actual next steps in terms of what is going to be done. So these are sort of out in the ether. So there are a lot of next steps that need to be taken, which we will discuss in our moving forward. So next slide, please. Oops. So next slide. So in terms of the micro, meso, and macro, what we did was,
go for a second.
So for micro, we had workshops and training focused on the connection between environment and health, as well as information and co-created resources geared towards the community. We developed and distribute manuals such as the Garden Access booklet, connecting community members with wider resources and other similarly focused organizations, as well as alternatives to growing space so that people can grow where they're planted, such as the Access Fresh program. At the meso level, it involved cultivating and maintaining relationships with City of Toronto staff and city councillors, and supporting community members to do the same. and also cross-pollinating with other initiatives. So other internal programs such as taking civic action, and then also institutional and organizational support that community members need, such as for things like seed and plant rescues with grocery stores and other big box stores. At the macro level, we had creating partnerships to advocate to the city for things like land access with organizations like Toronto Urban Growers, also highlighting the health impacts of environmental degradation and pushing the city to implement their own policies, and then supporting community members with deputations. So where we go from here, firstly, continuing to cultivate and train community groups to advocate for land access, and continue the relationship with Toronto Environmental Alliance to highlight the environmental and social detriments of golf courses and the unequal distribution of land access, to support Councillor Bradford and other garden groups with the Dentonia Park garden process, and work with Parks and Forestry, the Parks and Forestry and Recreation Manager to follow through with the limited recommendations from the City of Toronto. And it's also very important to push the City of Toronto to meet some of its own local and international commitments. And so these include things that the City of Toronto has signed on to, such as the Black Food Sovereignty Plan, the Toronto Food Strategy, the Toronto's official plan, which names food and gardens as important ways to create greener and more livable cities. Okay, so thank you everybody for that, for taking that time. And do you have any questions for me?